The sky over Seoul turned dark on a Tuesday afternoon, and it was not because of clouds or storms or anything natural at Allah. Massive shadow fell across the city, and people stopped in the streets to look up at something that should not exist. Ship was enormous beyond anything humans had ever built, and it hung in the sky like a floating mountain made of dark metal and strange. Vice Admiral Tae-Sung Park received the call while he was eating lunch at the military headquarters, and he dropped his chopsticks when his assistant ran in with panic on her face. "Sir," she said, and her voice was shaking, "and there is something in the sky, and it is not ours." Within 30 minutes, every military leader on Earth was connected through emergency channels, and satellites from 12 different nations were pointing at the alien vessel. The ship was 3 kilometers long and shaped like a giant sword pointing down at the planet, and along its sides were what appeared to be weapons of some kind. Glowing with purple energy, Admiral Park took command of the Pacific Fleet response, and he stood on the bridge of the USS Relentless, watching the alien ship on every screen around him. Lieutenant Ji-won Kim sat at the communications station, and her fingers were trembling over the controls as strange signals began coming through. "Sir," she said, "and I think they are trying to talk to us, put it through," said Admiral Park, and he straightened his uniform because he figured first contact with alien life deserved some dignity. The main screen flickered, and then an image appeared that made several crew members gasp out loud. Alien was tall and had purple skin that seemed to shimmer like oil on water, and it had 4 arms and a face that looked like someone had mixed a lizard with a nightmare. Behind this creature stood rows and rows of armored soldiers, holding weapons that pulsed with that same purple light. The alien opened its mouth and spoke in a deep, booming voice that the universal translator struggled to process. "Primitive species of the 3rd planet," the alien said, "and I am High Overlord Grimnak of the Eternal Galactic Empire, and we have conquered 10,000 worlds across this galaxy, and today we add your planet to our domain." Admiral Park waited for more. "You will surrender immediately," the alien continued, "and you will hand over all your resources, and your people will serve the Empire, or you will face total annihilation, and your cities will burn, and your species will be erased from existence." There was a long moment of silence on the bridge of the Relentless. Then Lieutenant Kim made a small sound, and Admiral Park looked over at her and saw that she was biting her lip very hard. "Lieutenant," he said, "and is there a problem?" She shook her head, but her shoulders were shaking, and then suddenly she could not hold it anymore, and she burst out laughing. It started with her, but it spread like wildfire across the bridge, and within seconds every single person was laughing so hard that tears were running down their faces. Admiral Park tried to maintain his composure, but when he looked at the alien face on the screen, with its serious expression and its 4 arms crossed in what was supposed to be an intimidating pose, he felt his own control slip away. He laughed, and he laughed until his stomach hurt. On the screen, High Overlord Grimnak looked confused, and his 4 arms uncrossed and crossed again in what might have been uncertainty. "You dare laugh at the Eternal Galactic Empire," he demanded, "and we have destroyed civilizations older than your species." "I'm sorry," Admiral Park said, and he wiped his eyes, "and I am truly sorry, but did you say your name is?" "Grimnakis," the alien said, "and I am High Overlord Grimnak, the destroyer of worlds and the conqueror of the 7 systems in the Grimnak." Admiral Park repeated, and he started laughing again. "And that is your actual name?" Alien looked deeply offended. Lieutenant Kim pulled herself together enough to check something on her console, and then she started laughing even harder. "Sir," she said, "and I just ran their ship through our sensor analysis, and Admiral Park asked their weapons," she said, "and they are using plasma technology." Several other officers who understood what that meant began laughing again. High Overlord Grimnak was now looking less like a terrifying conqueror and more like a confused tourist. "What is funny about plasma weapons?" he demanded. Admiral Park took a deep breath and tried to be diplomatic. "High Overlord Grimnak," he said, And I mean no disrespect, but humanity stopped using plasma weapons about 200 years ago. Alien blinked all four of his eyes. We found them too unstable, the Admiral continued, and too slow and too easy to counter. So we moved on to better things. What better things? The alien asked. Well, said Lieutenant Commander Yuna Song, who had been quietly analyzing the alien ship this whole time, and we mostly use directed antimatter weapons now and gravitational manipulation, technology and quantum disruption fields, and a few other things that are classified. The alien commander turned to speak with someone off screen, and there was a lot of rapid conversation in a language the translator could not quite catch. Also, Commander, Ai-Jin Lee added, and I do not mean to be rude, but is your ship made of metal? Of course. It is, Grimnak said, and it is forged from the strongest alloys in the Empire. The bridge crew exchanged looks. Our ship, said Commander Lee, and a groan from engineered biological compounds and self-repairing carbon lattice structures, and they are approximately 800 times stronger than any metal alloy, High Overlord. Grimnak was quiet for a moment. You are bluffing, he said. Finally, Lieutenant Kim pulled up a holographic display that showed the alien ship next to a diagram of a standard human destroyer. The human ship was smaller, but the technical readouts showed power outputs and defensive capabilities that made the alien vessel look like a toy we could show you our bigger ships, Admiral Park offered, but I did not think that would make you feel better. The alien conqueror who had destroyed 10,000 worlds sat down heavily in his command chair. How? He asked. And how is this possible? And we have been conquering species for 12,000 years, and no one has ever laughed at you, Admiral Park finished. Yes. Well, said the Admiral, and I suppose there is a first time for everything. Hey, turned to his crew and straightened his uniform again. Lieutenant Kim, he said, and open a channel to United Nations headquarters and tell them we have guests. Guest, Grimnak repeated Admiral Park smiled at the alien on the screen. High Overlord Grimnak, he said, I think we need to have a longer conversation, and I think you are going to find it very educational. He paused. Also, we really need to talk about your naming conventions, because Grimnak the Destroyer is honestly the funniest thing I have heard in years. The alien conqueror had no idea how to respond to that, and somewhere in orbit his massive warship floated helplessly, while the primitive species of the third planet continued laughing at the eternal galactic empire. It was not the first contact anyone had expected, but it was certainly the most entertaining one in human history. 3 days had passed since the alien ship appeared over Earth, and High Overlord Grimnak was experiencing emotions he had never felt in his 1,200 years of life. He sat in his private chambers aboard the Imperial warship Devastator and stared at the wall and tried to understand what had gone wrong. In all his centuries of conquest, no species had ever laughed at him, had made entire planets weep, and he had watched civilizations crumble before his fleets, and he had been called the most feared name in 10,000 star systems. And yet these humans, these small pink creatures on their tiny blue world, had looked at him and laughed until they cried. His second-in-command warrior Chief Thok entered the chamber and bowed deeply. High Overlord Thok said, and the humans have requested another communication. Grick sighed with all 4 of his lungs. What do they want now? They say they want to continue negotiations, Thok said, and they have sent a list of questions about our technology. Grimnak looked at the datapad Thok handed him and felt his stomach sink. The questions were detailed and technical, and they were asking about things Grimnak did not even understand about his own ship. Very well, he said, and opened the channel. The screen flickered to life, and this time there were more humans present. Admiral Park was there, but beside him sat a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Commander Ai-Jin Lee of the Earth Defense Research Division. Also present were Captain Dongwook Choi, who apparently specialized in weapons technology, and Lieutenant Commander Yuna Song, who was an expert in ship engineering. High Overlord Grimnock, Commander Lee said. And thank you for speaking with us again. Grimnock nodded stiffly. We have been analyzing your ship, she continued. And we have some observations we would like to share. The alien conqueror braced himself. First, Commander Lee said. And your faster than light travel system. And how does it work exactly? We use hyperspace tunneling, Grimnock said. And we compress space around the ship and travel through a higher dimension. Commander Lee nodded and made some notes. And how fast can you travel? She asked. We can cross the galaxy in approximately 300 standard cycles, Grimnock said with some pride. The humans exchanged glances. 300 years. Captain Choi said slowly. Grimnock did not understand the looks on their faces. How long does it take you? He asked Commander Lee. Pulled up a holographic display. Our standard jump drives can cross the galaxy in about 6 weeks, she said. And those are the civilian models. Grimnock felt his 4 hearts skip several beats. Our military vessels, she continued, and can do it in about 3 days. The alien commander sat in stunned silence. Thok leaned over and whispered something to him, but Grimnock waved him away. That is impossible, he said finally. Lieutenant Commander Unisong smiled kindly. We thought so too at first, she said. But then we figured out how to fold space properly instead of just compressing it. She pulled up another display showing equations that made Grimnock dizzy just looking at them. Your method works, she said. But it is like walking when you could be running or flying. Captain Choi added. Now about your weapons, Commander Lee said. And we noticed your plasma cannons have a firing rate of about 1 shot every 3 seconds. Grimnock nodded. And that was actually quite fast for Imperial weapons. Our antimatter projectors fire 60 times per second, the commander said. And in our gravitational lances are continuous beam weapons with no reload time. At Al. Grimnock felt sick. The humans seemed to notice his distress. We are not telling you this to mock you, Commander Lee said gently, and we genuinely want to understand how this happened. What happened? Grimnock managed to ask. How? You conquered 10,000 worlds, she said, and with technology that is so far behind what we expected from an interstellar empire. Grimnock looked at his clawed hands and tried to find words. We were always stronger, he said quietly, and every species we encountered was weaker than us, and we had better ships and better weapons, and they always surrendered or died, and you never had to improve. Admiral Park said. Grimnock shook his head. Why would we? He asked. And we won every battle, and we controlled every system we entered, and there was never any need to change anything. Humans were quiet for a moment. On Earth, Captain Choi said, and we had a very different experience. He pulled up images on the screen showing scenes from human history. We fought wars against each other for thousands of years, he said. And we developed weapons to kill each other more efficiently, and we almost destroyed ourselves multiple times. Grimnock watched images of explosions and battles and devastation flash across the screen. Every time we faced extinction, Commander Lee said, and we innovated and we adapted, and we found new ways to survive. She showed him images of nuclear weapons and biological warfare and climate disasters. We went through hell, she said, but we came out stronger each time. Lieutenant Commander Song nodded. When we finally united as a species, she said, and we took all that technology we had developed for war and we turned it toward exploration and defense, and you kept improving. Admiral Park added. And because we never knew what we might find out. Harry Grimnock understood now, and the understanding was bitter. You struggled, he said, and that made you strong. Yes, Commander Lee said, and you conquered everything so easily that you never needed to grow. The alien conqueror sat in silence for a long time. His whole civilization had been built on the idea that they were the supreme power in the galaxy and that no one could challenge them, and now he was learning that his mighty empire with all its conquered worlds and its ancient traditions was like a child compared to these humans who had been fighting among themselves just a few centuries ago. What happens now? He asked finally, and will you destroy us? Admiral Park looked surprised. Why would we do that? He asked. Because we threatened you, Grimnock said, and because we came here to conquer you. Humans exchanged glances again, and then they did something that confused Grimnock even more than their laughter had. They smiled at him with what looked like genuine warmth. Hi, Overlord Grimnock, Commander Lee said, and we do not destroy people just because they threatened us. Especially Captain Choi added, and when those people are flying around in ships that could not scratch the paint on our shuttles. Grimnock did not know whether to feel relieved or insulted. We have a different idea, Admiral, Park said, and we think you might actually like it, the alien. Conqueror leaned forward despite himself. What kind of idea, Admiral? Park grinned. How would you like to see what human technology can really do? The shuttle that came to pick up the alien delegation was smaller than Grimnock expected. Ambassador Subin Kang stood at the entrance with a warm smile on her face and gestured for the aliens. To board, High Overlord Grimnock, she said, and welcome, and I will be your guide today. Grimnock ducked his tall frame through the doorway, and his guards Thok and two warriors named Vorn and Creel followed behind him. Inside of the shuttle was clean and comfortable, and nothing like the dark metal corridors of Imperial ships. The seats adjusted automatically to fit the alien bodies, and soft music played from hidden speakers. This is a civilian transport, Ambassador Kang explained, and we use these for moving people between Earth and our orbital stations. Grimnock looked around at the sleek white walls and the large windows showing the blue curve of Earth below. How fast does it travel? He asked. Oh, Ambassador, Kang said casually, and about 0.3 light speed, but we will keep it slow today, so you can enjoy the view. Thuk made a choking sound beside him. 0.3 light speed, he whispered, and our fastest attack ships cannot go half that fast. Ambassador Kang either did not hear or pretended not to notice. The shuttle lifted smoothly, and Grimnock felt nothing at all, and no vibration and no sense of movement, and just the gentle view of Earth falling away beneath them. Within minutes they approached something that made all four of Grimnock's hearts stop. It was a space station, but calling it a station was like calling an ocean a puddle. The structure was massive, and it stretched across space like a small moon, and it bristled with towers and domes and structures that Grimnock could not even identify. This, Ambassador Kang said, and his defense. Platform 77, Grimnock repeated, and there are more of these 12 in Earth orbit, she said, and in about 40 more scattered through the solar system. Alien warriors exchanged horrified glances. This one is actually one of our older models, Ambassador Kang continued, and we built it about 60 years ago, and we mostly use it for training, not training. Thok said weakly, for new pilots and weapons operators. Ambassador Kang nodded, and the newer platforms are much more impressive. Those are classified. The shuttle docked smoothly, and the aliens were led through wide corridors filled with humans in various uniforms. Everyone they passed nodded politely to the aliens, but no one seemed afraid or even particularly impressed by the sight of four-armed, purple-skinned warriors. Grimnock realized with a sinking feeling that these humans saw his people as curiosities, not threats. They entered a large observation deck with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling and showed a vast open area of space marked with floating targets and obstacle courses. Ambassador Kang gestured to comfortable seats arranged before the windows. Please sit, she said, and the demonstration will begin shortly. Grimnock lowered himself into a seat and watched as a single small fighter craft emerged from somewhere below them. That is one of our standard interceptors, Ambassador Kang explained, and piloted today by Squadron Leader Junho Lim, and he has been flying for about 8 years. Fighter was tiny compared to Imperial warships, and it looked almost delicate with its swept wings and glowing engines. A voice came over the speakers. Squadron Leader Lim, the voice said, and you are cleared for combat demonstration, and 12 targets and full speed. Authorized. The alien delegation watched as 12 drone ships appeared in the distance and began moving in complex patterns, and Then the human fighter Mother Grimnack had seen 5 ships before, and he had watched Imperial pilots perform impressive maneuvers, but this was something else entirely. The fighter did not just fly, and it danced. It spun and twisted and changed direction so fast that Grimnack's eyes could barely track it, and it moved in ways that should have been impossible. Purple light flashed as the fighter weapons fired, and one by one the 12 drones exploded. The whole demonstration took less than 30 seconds. Thok was gripping the arms of his chair so hard that his claws had torn the fabric. How Grimnack managed to say, "And how did the pilots survive those maneuvers, Ambassador?" Kang smiled. "Inertial dampeners," she said, "and they cancel out the forces of acceleration and deceleration." She tapped a small device on her belt. "I am wearing one right now," she said, "and standard equipment for all military and most civilian personnel." She stood up and walked to the window. "Would you like to see how it works?" she asked. Before anyone could answer, she opened a small door in the window frame and stepped out into empty space. Grimnack lunged forward with a shout, but Thok grabbed his arm. The humans in the room did not react at all. Through the window they watched Ambassador Kang fall. She dropped 300 meters through the vacuum of space, and her hair floating around her head, and a small smile on her face. Then she stopped. She just hung there in empty space and waved up at Thema. Moment later, she began floating upward, and she rose smoothly back to the observation deck and stepped through the door as calmly as if she had just gone for a walk. "Anyway," she said, "I'm brushing off her uniform, and you wanted to see our weapon systems." Grimnack could not speak. His mighty empire had spent 12,000 years developing technology for war and conquest, and this human woman had just jumped into space for fun. The demonstration continued, and it only got worse. They showed the aliens their antimatter projectors and weapons that could punch holes through moons. They showed them gravitational lances and beams that could crush ships into balls of compressed metal. They showed them shields that could stop attacks from 1,000 plasma cannons at once, and through it all the humans remained cheerful and friendly and completely unafraid. At one point, a young human officer made a joke and everyone laughed, and Grimnack realized that to these people this was just a normal day. They were showing off the most terrifying weapons in the galaxy, and they were treating it like a tour of a museum. Finally, Ambassador Kang led them to a smaller room where refreshments had been laid out. "Please help yourselves," she said, "and we have tried to prepare food that should be safe for your biology." Grimnack sat heavily in a chair and stared at nothing. Thok poured him a drink and pressed it into his clawed hand. "High Overlord Vorn said quietly, and what do we do now?" Grimnack had no answer. Had come to this planet expecting to add another conquered world to the empire. Instead, he had discovered that his mighty civilization was hopelessly outmatched, and that the species he had planned to enslave could destroy him without breaking a sweat. Ambassador Kang sat down across from him, and her expression was kind. "High Overlord Grimnack," she said gently, "and I know this must be overwhelming." Grick laughed, and it was a bitter sound. "Overwhelming," he said, "and I came here to conquer your world, and I brought what I thought was an unstoppable warship." He gestured at the window and the massive station beyond. "And now I see that my ship is nothing, and my weapons are toys, and my empire that I thought ruled the galaxy is just a small thing in a very big universe." Ambassador Kang nodded slowly. "That is a lot to process," she said. Grimnack looked at her. "Why are you being kind to us?" he asked. "And we threatened you, and we came here as enemies." Ambassador Kang was quiet for a moment, because she said, "Finally, and we have been where you are." She smiled softly. "Humanity has faced extinction many times," she said, "and we have learned that the universe is very big and very dangerous, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is make friends instead of enemies." She reached out and touched his 4-fingered hand with her small human one. "We do not want to destroy you," she said, "and we want to help you." Grimnack felt something strange in his chest, and something that might have been the beginning of hope. "What kind of help?" he asked. Ambassador Kang grinned. Would you like to learn how we do things? 2 weeks had passed since the demonstration on defense platform. Seven and Grimnack had not returned to his ship. Instead, he and his delegation had been given comfortable quarters on Earth in a special facility designed for alien visitors, and they had spent every day learning about humanity. Dr. Minji Wang was the lead scientist in charge of the cultural exchange program, and she had become something like a friend to the alien conqueror. She was small and quiet with kind eyes, and she had a way of asking questions that made Grimnack think about things he had never considered before today. They sat together in a garden, and the sun was warm, and birds sang in the trees around them. Grimnack had never seen birds before, and he found them fascinating. Dr. Wang had brought tea, and Grimnack had discovered that he quite liked the strange, bitter drink. So, she said, and tell me about your empire, and how did it begin? Grimnack set down his cup and thought about the question. We were not always conquerors, he said, and long ago, my people were simple creatures living on a harsh world. He looked up at the blue sky, so different from the purple skies of his home. Our planet was dangerous, he continued, and full of predators and storms, and we learned to fight to survive. Dr. Wang nodded and took notes on a small device. And when you develop space travel, she said. Grimnack smiled grimly. We found that the stars were not so different from our home, he said. And everywhere we went there were other species and other threats, so you conquered them. Dr. Wang said it seemed like the only way. Grimnack admitted, and we were strong, and they were weak, and we took what we needed to survive. He paused and looked at his clawed hands. At first it was about survival, he said quietly. But then it became something else, and it became about power and pride, and proving that we were the strongest. Dr. Wang was quiet for a moment. Did you ever try to make peace with anyone? She asked. Grimnack shook his head. Why would we? He said, and we always won, and they always lost, and there was no reason to negotiate when we could simply take. He looked at the human scientist. I am beginning to understand, he said, and that this was a mistake. Professor Sung Ho Han joined them later that afternoon, and he brought with him historical records and videos that showed humanity own past. Grimnack watched images of human wars, and he saw weapons that killed millions in cities, reduced to ash, and people suffering in ways that made even a hardened conqueror uncomfortable. You did this to each other, he said, and shocked. Yes, Professor Han said, and many times. But why? Grimnack asked. And you are all the same species. The professor smiled sadly. Humans are complicated, he said, and we fight over resources and land and ideas, and sometimes we fight just because we are afraid of each other. He showed Grimnack more images, and these ones were different. This is what came after the professor said. Grimnack saw humans rebuilding and creating and working together, and he saw technology advancing at incredible speeds, and he saw people reaching out to help each other across the world. Every time we nearly destroyed ourselves, Professor Han explained, and we learned something and we grew stronger. Dr. Wang leaned forward. Takeshi said, and was that we had to struggle, and we had to face challenges that forced us to change. Grimnack thought about his own empire and its 12,000 years of easy conquest. We never struggled, he said slowly, and we never had to change, because nothing ever challenged us. Exactly, Dr. Wang said. And so you stayed the same while the universe moved on without youth. Alien conquerors sat in silence for a long time. That evening, Ambassador Kang came to visit, and she brought with her a group of human children from a nearby school. The children were curious and unafraid, and they asked Grimnack endless questions. Why do you have 4 arms? One little girl asked. Because I was born with them, Grimnack said, and feeling strange talking to such a small creature. Can you pick up 4 things at once? A boy asked. Yes, Grimnack said, and he demonstrated by picking up 4 toys from the floor. The children laughed with delight, and Grimnack found himself making a sound that might have been laughter too. Do you have kids? Another child asked. Grimnack paused and thought about his spawn back on the homeworld. Yes, he said. And I have 3 offspring. Do you miss them? The little girl, as scared Grimnack, felt something twist in his chest. Yes, he admitted. And I do miss them. The children surrounded him and asked more questions and showed him drawings they had made and told him about their lives on Earth. They talked about school and friends and games and dreams for the future. They were so full of hope and so unaware of the dangers of the universe, and yet Grimnack realized that their parents and grandparents had survived things that would have crushed his own people. These small, fragile creatures came from a species that had faced extinction again and kept going. When the children left, Dr. Wang sat down beside him. What are you thinking? She asked. Grimnack watched the children walk away, and their voices fading into the evening air. I'm thinking, he said, and that I have wasted 1,200 years. Dr. Wang waited for him to continue. I conquered worlds, he said, and I destroyed civilizations, and I thought I was building something great. He turned to look at her, but those children have more hope in their small hearts than my entire empire. As known in 12,000 years, Wang reached out and touched his arm. It is not too late, she said gently, and you can still change. Grimnack shook his head. My people will not understand, he said, and they have known nothing but conquest, and they will think I have gone mad. Then help them understand, she said, and show them what you have learned. Grimnack looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. How? He asked. Dr. Wang smiled. Start by telling them about the birds, she said, and the tea and the children who were not afraid. She stood up and offered him her hand. Come, she said, and there is more to show you and more for you to learn. Grimnack took her hand and let her lead him back inside. For the first time in centuries, he felt like he was moving toward something instead of just taking from others. It was a strange feeling and unfamiliar, but he was beginning to think it might be hope. 1 month had passed since the eternal Galactic Empire had arrived at Earth to conquer humanity. Now, Grimnack stood in the great assembly hall of the United Nations and looked out at hundreds of human faces watching him. Beside him stood President Yunji Beak and Admiral Park and Dr. Wang and all the humans who had become something he never expected. Friends. The hall was silent as President Beak stepped up to the podium. Citizens of Earth, she began, and honored guests from the Galactic Empire, and we are gathered here today to discuss the future. She looked out at the assembled crowd, and her eyes were serious but warm. 1 month ago, she said, and a ship appeared in our skies, and a voice demanded our surrender, and we were told we would be conquered or destroyed. A murmur ran through the crowd. Instead, she continued, and we found something unexpected, and we found an opportunity. She turned to look at Grimnack. Eternal Galactic Empire has existed for 12,000 years, she said, and they have conquered 10,000 worlds, and they believe themselves to be the supreme power in the galaxy. She paused. They were wrong. Some people in the crowd laughed nervously, but President Beak held up her hand. They were wrong about us, she said. But they were also wrong about themselves, and about what it means to be strong, and about what it means to build something that lasts. She stepped aside and gestured for Grimnack to approach the podium. The alien conqueror walked forward on legs that felt unsteady, and he looked out at the sea of human faces. For 1,200 years, he said, and his voice amplified through the hall, and I have been a conqueror, and I have destroyed worlds, and I have ended civilizations, and I thought I was building an empire that would last forever. He paused and took a breath. I was a fool. The hall was completely silent. When I came to your world, he continued, and I expected to find another weak species to crush, and instead, I found something I never imagined. Looked at the humans before him. I found a people who had nearly destroyed themselves a dozen times, and who had faced horrors that would have broken my own kind, and who had somehow come through it all stronger and wiser and more united than ever. He shook his head. My empire conquered because we were afraid to struggle, and your species struggled and fought and nearly died, and you became something magnificent. Turned to look at President Beak. I came here as a conqueror, he said, and I leave. Here is something else entirely. President Beak nodded and stepped back to the podium. Citizens of Earth, she said, and honored visitors from the Empire, and humanity has made a decision. She stood tall, and her voice was strong. We have decided not to conquer the eternal Galactic Empire. There was a moment of surprised silence, and then nervous laughter from the crowd. The president smiled instead. She said, and we offer something better, and we offer partnership and alliance and friendship. She pulled up a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy. The Empire has territory, she said, and resources and knowledge of thousands of star systems that humanity has never visited. The display shifted to show human technology. We have technology, she said, and that is generations ahead of anything the Empire has developed, and we are willing to share it. She looked at Grimnactiger. She said, and we can build something new and something that is not based on conquest or fear, but on cooperation and mutual growth. Grimnack felt his four hearts beating hard in his chest. Admiral Park stepped forward. There is another reason for this alliance, he said, and his voice grave. The display changed again and showed something that made the crowd murmur with unease. We have detected something, the Admiral said, and out in the dark spaces between galaxies, and we do not know what it is, and we have not made contact. The image showed strange readings and energy signatures and patterns that made no sense, but we know it is coming, he said, and when it arrives, we would rather face it together than alone. Grimnack thought about the vastness of space and the things that might be waiting out there, and he understood this was not just about friendship or trade or sharing technology. This was about survival. President Beak turned to face Grimnack directly. High Overlord Grimnack, she said, and will your empire accept our offer, and will you stand with us as partners and allies and friends? Grimnack looked at her and then at the humans filling the hall. He thought about the children who had asked him questions without fear. He thought about Tisha Wang, who had shown him kindness when he deserved none. He thought about the birds in the garden and the taste of tea and the feeling of sunlight on his skin. He thought about his own people back home and how much they needed to learn and how much they needed to change, and he thought about the darkness waiting between the stars and the threat that would one day come for all of them. Yes, he said, and his voice strong and clear, and we accept. The hall erupted in applause. Grimnack stood there and let the sound wash over him, and he felt something he had not felt in 1,200 years. He felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. President Beak shook his hand, and the cameras flashed, and people cheered. Then she leaned close and spoke quietly, so only he could hear. By the way, she said, and we really do need to talk about your naming conventions. Grimnack blinked. What do you mean? He is Sked Grimnack the Destroyer, she said, and her eyes twinkling, and Overlord of the Eternal Empire, and we are going to be allies now, and you need a name that does not make everyone laugh. Grimnack stared at her for a moment, and then he did something that would have been unthinkable a month ago. He laughed. It was a strange sound and rough and unpracticed, but it was real. The humans nearby looked surprised, and then delighted. Dior Wang caught his eye from across the room and smiled. This, Grimnack thought, and this is what hope feels like outside the Great Hall. The alien warship still hung in orbit, but now it seemed less like a threat and more like a promise. A promise of change, a promise of growth, a promise that even the oldest and most stubborn empires could learn new ways. And somewhere in the deep dark between galaxies, something ancient stirred and turned its attention toward a small blue world and its new allies. But that was a problem for another day. Today was for celebration. Today was for friendship. Today was for the moment when humanity finally met the Galactic Empire and could not stop laughing, and somehow and against all odds, and that laughter had changed everything. The end.